You're listening to the Drummer Daily Podcast, the only daily podcast dedicated just to drummers. Go to my website at danielhadaway.com. Hey there, we are back once again. Thanks for listening to Drummer Daily. I'm Daniel, and I'm happy to talk to you. Before I get started, I'm sitting on my living room couch, and my dog, Jean Ralphio, the mini Australian Shepherd, is fast asleep sitting right underneath my feet, and he is snoring pretty loud. I don't think the mic's going to pick it up, but it appears that he's also dreaming. He's doing the little dog twitching of his paws, like he might be chasing a rabbit in his dreams. So for some reason you hear a random scuffle and then a bark in the middle of the podcast. It's my dog having a dream. So thought I'd just get that out of the way in the front end. Okay, so today I want to talk to you a little bit more about drum muffling. Now, we've talked about this in a past episode, so if you'd like to hear more about drum muffling and some ideas and thoughts, look back through the podcast archives. It's in there, earlier episode. But today there's one other thing that I noticed this weekend, and I think I noticed it. I'll tell you about something else I did a couple weeks ago that I noticed this as well. But it's this, specifically about muffling. What I've seen a lot of guys do is they overdo it a little bit on the drum muffling. And let me tell you why this matters. So let me tell you the story I was going to tell you. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in Austin, Texas, and I was hanging out with my friend Rami, who has A&F drums, which of course if you've heard me talk at all, I love their drums. That's the company that I have a relationship with, and they just have literally just the most fantastic drums that I've ever played. They're just ridiculous. So I was hanging out with Rami, and we were shooting some videos for them to put on social media, and I was checking out some new snare drums and some things they have, some things they're working on, some really cool, exciting things. But he had, when we got to the studio to do these videos, he had a bunch of snare drums from A&F, and a couple of them I'd played before and a few I had not. But what I noticed with almost all of them was that they were a little less muffled than what I would have expected or what I'm used to hearing. But I kind of went with it. And then after the mix was done, I realized that it sounded great, and they weren't ringing. It wasn't obnoxious. It sounded really nice. And so that's kind of story one. Story two is I have A&F drums, and I have a brass snare drum. I think it's 5x14, so pretty standard size snare drums go. But anyway, the cool thing about A&F drums that I've learned is that the overtones, the rings, the ring that comes out when the drum is tuned correctly is really pleasing and nice. But also, specifically on A&F drums, they have single flanged hoops. So maybe I'll talk about the difference between hoops at some point in the future, another episode. Make a note of all these things. I keep having ideas for podcast episodes while I'm doing a podcast episode. But anyway, the cool thing about A&F drums, about the single flanged hoops, is that something about the quality of that makes where right in the middle of a drum, when you hit a drum dead center, there's not as much ring as if you hit it just a little bit off center. The more you go towards the edge of the drum when you hit it, the more ring you get. Well, A&F drums, for lack of a better term, snare drums are very unforgiving as far as the amount of play you have in the middle of the head to get out of center and still get that kind of dead, less ringy tone. You pretty much have to hit it dead center, maybe the size of a $50 or maybe a quarter, probably somewhere between those two. Right in the middle of the drum. That's about the area you have to hit the drum to get it to stay dry-ish sounding. But so if you're an undisciplined drummer and really sloppy, it takes some adjustment to get used to playing that. But for me, what I've learned to do and what I do when I play is I actually kind of play with that ring that I get naturally. And So if I hit it dead center, I get that dead sound. Then if I move it just a little off center, move the stick a little off center, I get a ring. But what's really cool is that in context, two things. A, the amount of ring that you hear on a snare drum when you're playing it by itself, excuse me, is always a little more than what you are going to hear when you're playing it in context with the full drum kit. You're not going to hear as much ring. It kind of goes away, doesn't get perceived by the listener or by you when you're playing the drum with kick, snare, hi-hat, toms, all the other stuff that goes on with the drum kit. So you're not going to hear as much. The second thing is, obviously when a band comes in, it's even less apparent that more of it is masked. But what I've learned is that in general, once things get mixed or things get in context, you're not going to hear near as much ring as you think you would. And what happens is if you over muffle a drum, a lot of times you're going to lose the volume, or there's a lot of edge and attack, crispness, depending on what drum you're playing. There's a lot that you lose by muffling other than just overtones and ring. You're losing other characteristics of the drums. And so you don't want to overdo it on muffling. And I think my point of this episode is saying you should muffle your drum a little less than what you think you want. The other cool thing about having the ring available to you is as long as you tune the drum properly, that ring is not just annoying. You can use the ring as almost like what happens. I've learned is that if you are playing the snare right in the middle and you have that dry sound, and then on a big accent hit, like a big epic song, doing big snare hits, like big 80s, reverbed out snare, hitting that a little bit of ring with the snare hit gives it the people perceive that as reverb. They perceive it as being a bigger, louder, more reverberating sound. It sounds like you're changing the size of the room when you hit that ringy sound. And I don't mean hitting the edge on the edge. You're not playing a reggae song. I don't mean like banging on the rim of the drum, basically right on the edge of the head. I mean playing just barely off center where you get a little more ring than you were for most of the song. Those accents all of a sudden sound like they have this massive reverb on them. And the sound guy hasn't done anything. You're playing the same drum. He hasn't touched a thing, but you're playing with the perception of the dynamics, not just the actual dynamics of how loud you're playing. So you can use that, but the problem is if you've muffled the drum so much that ring will never come out, you don't have that option. Basically by muffling the drum, you're limiting your options. It can be easier sometimes to play with that muffling if you're doing something in the studio, for example, where you need this one consistent sound, and any inconsistency is going to be picked up, and maybe you don't have the discipline or the hand control to really stick in one spot. It's great to muffle because you need that consistent sound. But when you're playing live, you don't want to limit your options and your creativity. At least I don't. I like to muffle my drums a little less. So I've learned with these drums, the amount of muffling that I've used, that it's actually better to not overdo it with the muffling. Try to limit myself a little bit. So try that out. Try it out the next time you have a chance to practice with your band or play at church or whatever it is, just for a little bit. Maybe take one of those moon gels off, or take that big fat snare drum off and put something else, a little more subtle on there. And then once you play with the music, you get it in context with everything. See how it sounds, because it really can be an amazing thing to discover how your drums truly sound when they're kind of allowed to speak how they're meant to be spoken. That's not right. They're allowed to speak how they're meant to speak. There you go. Whatever. All right. I need some coffee because apparently I'm running low on the brain power. So I will talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.